The night was quiet, but the world was changing. A cold wind swept through northern Italy as Julius Caesar's army halted beside a narrow river, the Rubicon. The water was shallow, barely a few feet deep, yet to step across it meant treason. To cross was to declare war on Rome itself. Caesar sat on horseback, staring at the dark ripples under the moonlight. Behind him, 40,000 men waited in silence. Ahead of him lay destiny. For years he had conquered Gaul, crushed tribes, and sent rivers of gold and blood flowing back to Rome. But now, the same republic he had served ordered him to lay down his command and return as a private citizen, to face trial, humiliation, and perhaps execution. He could obey, or he could cross. And as the first hoof touched the water, he whispered the words that would echo for 2,000 years. The die is cast. That night, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, and the Republic crossed the point of no return. The making of a conqueror. The outsider. Caesar was born into privilege, but not into power. His family carried an ancient name, the Julians, but little influence. In Rome, reputation was everything, and Caesar's early life was marked by debt, danger, and defiance. He was barely 20 when Sulla, Rome's dictator, ordered his death for refusing to divorce his wife, Sulla's enemy's daughter. Caesar fled, hunted, stripped of his title. He hid in the countryside, surviving on loyalty and luck. It was there, among outlaws and soldiers, that ambition took root. He returned to Rome years later, not broken, but forged. He would never be powerless again. The general who became a legend. Through brilliance and brutality, Caesar rose. He charmed the people with words, won allies with money he didn't have, and conquered enemies through sheer will. When he was sent to govern Gaul, no one expected much. 8 years later, he returned a god. He annihilated tribes from the Alps to the Atlantic. He invaded Britain. He built bridges across rivers no army had dared to cross. He wrote his victories like poetry, each sentence clean, calm, and ruthless. Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. But his success terrified Rome. The Senate saw not a hero, but a threat. The enemies within. The Republic trembles. By 50 BC, the Republic was a house divided. The Senate was no longer a council of wise men. It was a nest of rival factions, ruled by fear and bribery. Caesar's power in the north grew beyond control. His former ally, Pompey Magnus, the Great Pompey, had become his rival. Once comrades, now enemies. The Senate, siding with Pompey, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, to face trial, humiliation, and perhaps execution. He could obey, or he could cross. And so he chose defiance. He chose war. The long night before the crossing. On January 10th, 49 BC, Caesar and his legion reached the banks of the Rubicon. Behind them lay Gaul, his triumphs, his legions, his life's work. Ahead, the soil of Italy, sacred ground, forbidden to armies. Roman law forbade any general from crossing the Rubicon under arms. It was the Republic's last defense against dictatorship. He paused. His officers waited, tense. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. One account says he hesitated, whispering that crossing would set all the world aflame. But another voice, perhaps ambition, perhaps destiny, answered, "Let the dice fly high." And so he crossed. The Republic falls silent. The march on Rome. As dawn broke, the legionaries moved like a tide across the shallow river. They sang no songs, raised no banners. The sound of their sandals on the frozen earth was enough. In Rome, panic exploded. Senators fled the city. Pompey abandoned the capital and marched south to raise an army. The Republic, founded on laws, reason, and tradition, was paralyzed by fear. For the first time in its history, Rome was conquered not by barbarians, but by its own general. The Civil War. The Rubicon was not a river. It was a fuse. Within months, the empire was ablaze. Brother fought brother. Senators took up arms against their own legions. Pompey's forces fled to Greece, where Caesar followed, striking swiftly. At Pharsalus, he met them in battle. The fight was short, brutal, and decisive. When the dust cleared, Pompey was gone, defeated and disgraced. He fled to Egypt, seeking refuge under a young pharaoh. But even there, Caesar's shadow reached him. Pompey was murdered before he could speak a word. When Caesar arrived, they presented his rival's severed head as a gift. He wept. Not for Pompey, but for the Republic they had both destroyed. The dictator of Rome. The rise of a king without a crown. When Caesar returned to Rome, he came not as conqueror, but as savior. The city hailed him as a god. The Senate, too frightened to oppose him, granted him powers beyond any man before him. Dictator for life, a title whispered in awe and fear. He rebuilt the state, forgave his enemies, and filled the city with festivals and feasts. He spoke of reform, of mercy, of peace. But the Republic had already died. It just didn't know it yet. The warning in the marble. Beneath the celebrations, unease spread. Caesar's image appeared on coins, something no living Roman had ever dared. His statue stood among the gods in the forum. Crowds shouted Rex, King, and for a brief moment he didn't correct them. To the senators, it was treason made flesh. Rome had traded one tyrant for another. They whispered among themselves, Brutus, Cassius, the old guard of the Republic. They told themselves they would save Rome, but what they would really save was an idea already broken. The Ides of March. The final warning. The spring of 44 BC came with omens. A comet burned across the sky. A soothsayer warned him, beware the Ides of March. He laughed.
Beware the Ides of March.
On the morning of March 15th, Caesar entered the theater of Pompey, the very place named after the rival he had destroyed. The irony was perfect. He greeted the Senate as friends. He sat upon his gilded chair. And as he leaned forward to hear a petition, steel flashed behind him. The death of a god. The first dagger struck his neck, then another, and another. 23 times they stabbed him, each wound a vow to restore the Republic. Caesar fell at the base of Pompey's statue, blood pooling at the feet of the man whose death had once sealed his victory. Et tu, Brutus. Whether he spoke it or not, the words became legend. Betrayal turned into eternity. The conqueror of Gaul, the master of legions, the ruler of the world, dead at the hands of his own friends. They thought Rome would be free. Instead, they unleashed chaos. The empire rises from the ashes. The funeral of the Republic. When Caesar's body was carried through the streets, the people wept. They had lost not a tyrant, but a protector. Mark Antony lifted his blood-stained cloak before the crowd and cried, "This was the noblest man of them all." Rage swept through the forum. The mob turned on the conspirators, setting their homes ablaze. The dream of the Republic drowned in the fire. From Caesar's ashes rose something new, something unstoppable. His heir, Octavian, would avenge him, and in doing so, he would become the first emperor of Rome, Augustus. The Republic was gone. The empire had begun. The river still flows. 2,000 years later, the Rubicon still runs through northern Italy, narrow, quiet, unremarkable. But the name has become immortal. To cross the Rubicon means to take a step that cannot be undone. On that cold January night, Julius Caesar didn't just march his army across a river. He marched civilization itself toward empire, toward kings, emperors, and the death of democracy. He believed he was saving Rome. In truth, he was burying it. History remembers him as both savior and destroyer. The man who rose too high, who loved Rome so fiercely, he destroyed its heart to possess it. And though his body fell at Pompey's feet, his shadow never did, because the moment Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the world crossed it with him.